Hello and welcome to Africa News, bringing you the top stories on the continent today. Firstly, in South Sudan, African mediators attempting to broker a peace deal have held talks with President Salva Kiir. This as clashes continue in the oil-producing north, threatening the nation's economic lifeline. The Red Cross says some 40 bodies have been recovered in the Central African Republic's capital, where tensions remain high. We bring you an exclusive report on the thousands forced to flee the violence. And Egypt's military-backed government has turned up the pressure on the Muslim Brotherhood, arresting dozens of its supporters. The move comes in a response to a bomb on a bus in Cairo earlier today. Hello and welcome. Firstly, amid ongoing violence in South Sudan, several African mediators attempting to broker a peace deal held talks with President Salva Kiir this Thursday. Leaders from neighbours Kenya and Ethiopia said good progress had been made. Ethiopia, alongside the US and Norway, is leading efforts to diffuse tensions between President Kiir Adinka and his rival and ex-deputy Riek Machar Anua. Well, meanwhile, officials say fighting continues in the oil-producing north, where rebels have seized several oil wells. Analysts fear the move could have disastrous consequences for the nation's economic lifeline. Alex Turnbull reports.
They left after clashes erupted outside their plant. These 300 Chinese oil workers were evacuated from the Fuluj oil field in the north of South Sudan. Chinese authorities say more could follow if fighting spreads further across the country's oil-rich states.
The main oil fields are operating normally. Today, only some employees were evacuated and there are still a number of our colleagues left. If the situation worsens, we will enact different evacuation measures, including moving operators out of Juba. If it deteriorates further, we may consider closing the oil field.
More than two-thirds of the oil extracted by Sudan and South Sudan are exported to China. And South Sudan's oil industry relies heavily on Chinese investments. In fact, despite a strict non-interference policy, China's oil interests have forced it to play an increasing diplomatic role in the region. In early 2012, the Chinese government helped both countries broker a deal over pipeline fees and pushed for oil production to resume. This Thursday, the Foreign Ministry said a Chinese envoy would land in Juba in the coming days to help all parties reach a peaceful solution. But considering whoever administrates South Sudan's oil fields controls 98% of the government's resources, Chinese diplomats might have a hard time convincing opposing factions to sit at the negotiation table. Indeed, after his troops took control of several oil fields, the former South Sudanese vice president was eager to keep the oil flowing.
The oil production continues. We will protect the oil companies. All we need is that there be an international body that will market and sell the oil of South Sudan.
With oil fields a big prize for warring factions, foreign investors could be looking at more evacuations. But observers fear the country's economy might not recover from another production shutdown. Last time around, the government was forced to borrow some $5 billion and struggled for months to pay civil servants.
Well, according to the United Nations Special Envoy to South Sudan, the first reinforcements to the UN peacekeeping mission are expected to arrive in 48 hours. The Security Council agreed to almost double the size of the mission, known as UNREST, allowing for up to 12,500 soldiers and 1,300 police. Now, in other news on the continent, the International Red Cross says up to 40 bodies have been recovered in the Central African Republic's capital following clashes there. Tensions remain high after the death of 6 Chadian peacekeepers in Bangui on Wednesday. The contingent was accused of siding with a mostly Muslim former rebel group in the majority Christian country. Well, the ongoing violence has triggered panic amongst residents, resulting in hundreds of thousands being displaced. This exclusive report from Nicolas Jaman and Romeo Langlois, who are in Bangui.
After a night of clashes, the gunshots become more sporadic. Many choose this moment to flee their homes once again.
It's the third time we fled our home. We leave, come back home, and have to flee again.
More than 200,000 civilians have fled the fighting between the anti-Balaka and President Michel Djotodia's supporters, the former Seleka rebels. French and African forces patrol the city, but they cannot answer all the calls for help.
We are abandoned. We call the French forces and MISCA, but they don't come.
No one looks after us.
They are firing now.
More and more Bangui residents have decided to arm themselves. The conflict has become interreligious. Churches and mosques have come under attack. A charred body lies in the back of this burnt pickup truck. These 3 Muslims were nearly lynched, accused of being members of the Seleka. French soldiers keep the angry crowd at bay.
I was never part of Seleka. Neither was he. He's just a taxi driver. They want to kill us. They threw stones at us. We are wounded. They didn't ask us who we are. They believe all Muslims are bandits. But it's not true. And it's not true that all Christians are bandits.
Yet despite all the fighting, some residents remain optimistic.
A reconciliation is possible? God willing, we Muslims have no problems. Even if someone kills my mother and asks for my pardon, I will give it.
But for the moment, for many here, the only option is to flee.
Heading north now, Egypt has turned up the pressure on the Muslim Brotherhood, arresting at least 38 of its supporters on suspicion of belonging to the group, now considered a terrorist organisation. Earlier today, a small bomb exploded on a bus in Cairo, injuring 5 people. It follows a deadly suicide attack a day earlier that killed 16 people in the Nile Delta province. While the Brotherhood strongly condemned that attack, meanwhile, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says the country will remain steadfast in the face of terrorism.
The news is the headline all over Cairo. The long-existing Muslim Brotherhood has been declared a terrorist organization for the first time. There are many opinions on the matter.
I agree with this decision by the government, but it may even have been too late. The Brotherhood have been terrorists for 80 years. Their purpose is to kill people.
This is the best way to punish them. Egypt is in a state of war. It has become impossible to protect our families. We are afraid to send our kids to school. This is the best decision the government could take. Civilians are now the targets of the violence. Thursday morning in Cairo, a bomb exploded in front of a bus and a second bomb was defused.
I was driving when I heard an explosion. All the windows of the bus were blown out. 4 people were injured, 1 very seriously.
This latest attack followed a much more deadly one. On Tuesday, a booby-trapped car exploded in front of a security center, killing 15 people, including 14 policemen. The attack was claimed by a jihadi group linked to Al-Qaeda based in the Sinai Desert. The government blamed the Muslim Brotherhood. As terrorists, all their gatherings are outlawed and they risk severe penalties. The Islamic group says this is illegal. Demonstrating for the past 6 months to demand the return of President Morsi, they are calling on activists not to give up.
And finally, in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a UN special force assisted government troops to retake the town of KAMANGO from rebels on Wednesday. The UN intervention force used helicopters to fire on rebels belonging to the Islamist Ugandan cell ADF NALU. Now, the group had previously claimed the town during an attack that killed civilians. Well, analysts fear ADF NALU, one of the oldest but least known armed organisation in DR Congo's east, could become a link in East Africa's growing network of radical Islamist groups. Well, you're up to date. Do stay tuned for more news coming up after the break.
8:30 Paris time.
Les équipements qui exportent
مع اجتماع reste à savoir maintenant comment les juges very entertaining film
finish ahead of the team.
message audio d'ailleurs ça therefore he is dispatching
يعرف ما هو nous avions très peu de صفحة من
C'est en fait un temple bouddhiste.
des chefs
Journée historique.
malgré tout la
Général en elle-même libyenne à l'armée régulière libyenne.
France 24, everywhere.